I'm Renee Richard, host of Roots of Faith. Today we're in downtown Baton Rouge at the Cathedral. This is the oldest church parish in the city of Baton Rouge, having been established in 1792. It is the parish of St. Joseph. We say St. Joseph Cathedral, but it's one of our parishes. Join us as we explore it. I have as my guest today, Father Paul Counce. Father Counce, thank you for being our guest on the show today. We'll be talking about your parish. How long have you been here?
I have been the pastor here for 10 years.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in the priesthood.
The most important thing your viewers need to know is we've known each other since we were children, even though you're much younger than me. I'm a Baton Rouge native. I went into the high school seminary back in '67 and eventually was ordained a priest in 1979. Going to the seminary here in Baton Rouge, over at St. Ben, north of Covington, and over in Europe at the University of Louvain there. Since I've been ordained, I've served as associate pastor in a couple of parishes, as pastor of St. Pius X in North Baton Rouge, and then Bishop Baton sent me away to Canada to get a degree in canon law so that I could become the judicial vicar of the diocese. That's the fancy title for the person who is the head of the diocesan tribunal. The chief canon lawyer of the diocese mostly deals with advising the bishop on points of canon law that you don't need to know about, and handling marriage annulment cases, which sadly virtually every family in the church occasionally needs to come to the tribunal and ask about. I served for 22 years as the in-house chancellor of the diocese. I have taught at Notre Dame Seminary and in our Religious Studies Institute programs. I now teach in the diaconate formation program. What else do I do? Pretty much anything they ask me to.
That's it. You wear but two main hats, pastor here at the cathedral, and then head of the tribunal.
Head of the tribunal.
At the diocese. For those, he just explained, I was going to ask him before we started because I knew before I got into this position, I didn't understand some of these words, for our viewers. So,
No.
Okay. This parish, although it is our cathedral, it is a parish. It is the mother church for all of the Catholics in the Baton Rouge area, having begun in 1792 is when it was founded.
That's right. We were founded by the King of Spain, not a decree of any bishop, but by His Most Catholic Majesty, the King of Spain, in 1792. And the first pastor here, a priest named Charles Burke, although he usually went by Carlos Burke because it appealed to the Spanish. He spoke French, and he actually was Irish, so he spoke English. So he, as a polyglot, was able to minister to everybody in Baton Rouge at the time. We are the oldest church of any denomination here in the Baton Rouge city or area. There are only, I think, 3 parishes older than us in the Diocese of Baton Rouge: Donaldsonville, St. James, and St. Gabriel.
And Point Capee.
Point Capee is not a parish. Ha ha. Canon lawyers know these things.
You're right, it was colonial.
The chapel is actually very old, but it's not a parish anymore. It was moved to New Roads.
Oh, okay.
Eventually.
I was talking about like when it was founded.
Yes.
That's cool.
That's cool.
He does know all these technical things.
I like to think I'll win most trivia games. In any case, St. Joseph Parish was, again, the only church in Baton Rouge until a few Protestant congregations began being founded. So much so that some of the early pastors actually allowed Protestants in town to come here and have services in the Catholic Church building, rather than only have to be able to gather in people's front yards and living rooms. That was a little bit of an ecumenical generosity that far predated Vatican II.
You're right, and in our record books with those early priests, they will put Calvinists. They put their denomination in the books then. So St. Joseph here as a parish began closer to the river, over by pretty much where the old Our Lady of the Lake Hospital was, on that part of town. But there have been several churches built on this site.
This is actually the third parish church. There was the original church, very small chapel really, up by north of where the state capitol is. There was a smaller church here on this site that was eventually, I think it was built in 1830, but by 1853 they decided to build the present building. And that's when this church was begun. It took them 3 years to build it. I think I read somewhere it cost something like $12,000 total back then. A lot of money back then. A lot of money back then. They had severe financial problems for the first several decades after they built this church, just paying down the debt they incurred. And then, of course, the worst possible thing happened in the Civil War. The Union aimed at the church. We have the cannonballs in the archives.
We have the picture
that destroyed
the
the church. It had to be rebuilt after the Civil War. But progressively, during Reconstruction, then in 1890-91, they put the bell tower on and put the clock in the steeple. Since then, since about 1890, the church has pretty much looked the way from the outside the way it is. Now, on the inside, in the 1920s, we put up the stained glass windows. In the 1930s, we put up the mosaic Stations of the Cross. In the 1960s, the sanctuary was renovated so that we could have liturgy as Vatican II indicated could be done. Finally, in the 1990s, we put an organ in the back of church, an organ loft, so that both the organ and the choir could be stationed there above the baptismal font. Other than that, I don't really think there are very many notable changes on the interior of the church, but it is, of course, quite different than it was back in the 1800s.
We were talking about St. Joseph Parish, but key thing, in 1961, the Diocese of Baton Rouge is formed, and that changes things for the church they choose as a cathedral. A cathedral doesn't necessarily have to be the oldest, correct?
No, it often is not. But in this particular case, they picked the fourth oldest church in the diocese because we're in Baton Rouge, the Sea City. St. John the 23rd, the Pope himself, named this to be the cathedral church of the diocese. Cathedrals simply are the official place where the bishop's seat is placed. And so from a point of view of interior renovations, which we were just talking about, one of the first things we had to start planning for was installing not just a temporary chair against the wall, but a permanent bishop's seat. That is called in Latin the cathedra, and that's where the word cathedral comes from. The bishop's seat is here. That doesn't mean that he's here all the time. He basically can come whenever he wants to. I certainly don't mind, but it remains a parish church for the downtown area, and sort of a destination parish for the whole diocese. Anybody who wants to come here is certainly welcome to be here to have their baptisms and weddings and things like that here as well. That's probably a good thing, because demographically, downtown Baton Rouge over the years became less and less a residential area and more a commercial and governmental area. So we actually don't really have that many technical parishioners. We have lots of friends.
Right. When I was researching for this show, one of the things that I read was that when we were established diocese, there were 2 sky rises in the Baton Rouge area. That was it in 1961. But shortly after we became a diocese was Vatican II. Mm-hmm. And of course our bishop was there for Vatican II, Bishop Tracy.
Bishop Tracy was very inspired by Vatican II because he had just become auxiliary bishop of Lafayette and then bishop of Baton Rouge. And he sort of said, I'm not going to change anything till I see what the bishops of the world prefer and want to do. And as many of the stories say, he went an old-fashioned bishop and came back a modern bishop. One of the things he very much wanted to see happen was a proper renovation of the cathedral in the style of Vatican II. Mm-hmm. I suppose it is arguable as to whether or not any particular element or not was a good idea. The biggest impressive thing that he managed to accomplish was acquiring the Ivan Mestrovic crucifix for the back wall of the cathedral. Mm-hmm. I suppose you've noticed it's large.
It's very large.
It doesn't fit in anybody's living room. No. We had the space for it.
Great.
And the cathedral was put into the cathedral for him. It's actually worn pretty well it's been 50 years now since the last renovation, and it's quite possible that sometime in the next couple of decades we may begin to consider improving a few things. Between me and you and everybody else, the lighting and the sound systems could be improved. We're in the 21st century now, but in a building this old, there's always going to be rather constant maintenance. And one of these days, we'll have to tackle them, I suppose.
That's true. Now, when Bishop Tracy did do the renovations, which was like 1966, a couple of years back.
66 to 68, the building was basically closed for 2 years.
Right.
We had Mass over in the gym across the street. Fortunately, there was still a gym across the street until 1968. The pastor of the cathedral at the time was Don Borders. He eventually became the founding bishop of Orlando, Florida, and then the Archbishop of Baltimore, a very well-known and well-respected churchman in the United States. He helped Bishop Tracy design and implement the changes of Vatican II, not just in this particular building, but in the structure of the entire consultative process of the diocese, founding the Priests' Council, founding the committees and liturgical commissions and building and review boards and things like this that basically help the bishop in making decisions.
Right.
The worst kind of bishop decides everything on his own.
That's it.
The best kind of bishop knows what everybody else thinks before he makes a decision.
That's it. Well, this cathedral was the first in the nation to have a reconciliation room, according to
I've read that. I've read that. I guess you'd have to go to all 190 cathedrals to find out if that's really true. If it's true, we could use a better reconciliation room, a bigger one.
That was big changes
But it was
with
a big
Vatican
change.
II back then.
We're one of the first cathedrals, certainly, to have a large font by the front door of the church, for you welcome someone through baptism into the church as a member, but also you welcome someone into the church building through the baptismal font, by the baptismal font. That was kind of a nice idea that not that many places actually had implemented before we did here. Many baptistries were off in corners or in side chapels,
side rooms,
something like that, which that has its value, but we honestly wanted to do something that was sort of reflective of the new emphasis on the baptism of people and how that brings them into the church and empowers them for ministry.
One of the other things that I did read, you might correct me if I'm not correct, but in reading this, that it won a national award for...
Oh, several.
Several? Well, I read one for sure for the conversion of a historic building, because the building was about 150 years old, into, a modern post-Vatican II building. Many older churches you'd be hard-pressed to modernize them well. This building here is an immensely large rectangular square space. Think about it. Even though the back sanctuary was added later, at the time of the Civil War, this was a huge auditorium-type space. It gives us the space. You had a good canvas to work on. You have lots of space to ordain priests. When priests and deacons have to lie down on the floor before they're ordained. We have space for that. We have space for the rites of election, where hundreds of people and their sponsors come before joining the church at Easter. We have the space. We were just talking, you mentioned a few things that take place here with the space here, but as a cathedral, there are certain events that will always be here, correct?
Right. There isn't a rule that says the bishop has to do all ordinations here or the rite of election here, but it's the most appropriate place for a diocesan-wide liturgical gathering to occur. A diocesan-wide social gathering probably is appropriate at the Catholic Life Center, but for worship, the cathedral has pride of place. And there are many other things that are not regular, like the rite of election and the chrism mass and ordinations. I note that Bishop Duca decided to have a reconciliation service for the tragedy of child sexual abuse in the church some time ago, and he wanted to have that special Way of the Cross penitential service here. Very appropriate.
Right.
That's the kind of thing we do. We built some years ago a new parish hall, really enlarged the old parish hall, so we could better accommodate large groups of people here on Cathedral Square. That's the kind of thing that we want to be of service to the whole diocesan church, of course.
That's it.
We also have regular parish mass.
That's where we were going with this. Tell us about this place as a parish.
As a parish, I have to admit it's different because it is so small. There are only about 60 people 60 parishioners who actually live in the territory, close enough to say walk to church. But we have 200 or 300 people who regularly come here and consider us their parish. Thank God for them, because it not just fills up the pews, but their ministry and their assistance is of great help.
That's right, because the ministries are so important, and those are the parishioners that
Back in the
some of these
60s, our parish school closed here. Sacred Heart, about 10 blocks away, is really the parish school now for anyone who would live in the parish, who would live in this area, right? But so many of our ministries now are very much focused on downtown, providing a food pantry. 3 days a week we hand out food bags to the homeless who come by, and there are,
plenty here, yeah.
I think we took a count a few months ago, and we were giving out something like 600 in the course of a month.
Yeah.
Liturgically, our choir at our main Mass, 10:30 Mass on Sunday mornings, is justifiably famous for the richness of its sound. And we really feel like we're carrying on a heritage of church music by trying to be mindful of the polyphony, the choral music tradition in the church. Is it more old-fashioned? Yes, it is. This is not the place to have necessarily praise and worship music like you would if you had 900 kids in an elementary school all buzzing around underneath. It's probably not the same kind of music that you'd have at a university student center.
Right.
But our liturgies here try to be formal and proper. Although I will admit that as long as I'm here, you're also going to have a gleam in the priest's eye and a smile on his face that tries to be properly formal and yet properly informal too, and welcoming.
This parish has been known in researching it for its music over the years.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're in a moment of transition now because for 32 years we had one musician and choir director leading. He passed away rather sadly, the late Mr. Robbie Giroir. But we've hired a new organist, and although he's been on the job only a short time, we hope and look forward to continued growth and good things from that. I don't want to think, though, that just the music program is the only outstanding aspect to our worship. We give people space. I'm sure we've all been to church where you've had to squeeze in. You feel like sardine in a can. Here, because of the smaller numbers of people, people have space. This is an oasis of quiet and peace in the middle of bustling downtown during the day. An awful lot of people come in here just to make a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, just to breathe deeply and commune with God a little bit. There's really not a better place, I think, downtown where you can find that kind of thing. Our parish tries to reach out to the downtown workers to give them a place to be.
So you have daily Mass?
We have daily Mass at noon every day. It does break up the day from a convenience standpoint, but that's when people who work in the banks and government buildings all around can get off on their lunch hour and come and spend, say, a half an hour with us.
Here. Do you have an adoration chapel?
We don't. It would be very, very difficult to have one, for example, in the evenings and overnight. And so we don't. But during the day, the church is open during the day, every day. And so it's always possible to come and pray before the Blessed Sacrament, reposed, not exposed, for prayer.
we have talked about the events that occur because it's a cathedral. What about some of the events as a parish that happen here?
Well, right before the break, we mentioned that we are an older parish for the past 3 or 4 decades, but we're getting younger. More and more young families are joining, and so we're trying to reestablish some of that interest within our parish community. For example, this year, for the first time, I think in about 50 years, we had an Easter egg hunt. And the person who was in charge of checking everybody in stopped counting when he got to 50 kids. We had a wonderful time. We do have Family Day. We call it Grand Day in the fall. It's sort of our fall festival. And it's not for grandparents. It's for you if you are someone's grandchild.
That is a cool
which
concept.
means everybody, of
Yeah.
course. And so we have face painting for the kids and pony rides for them and that sort of thing. But we also have wonderful time for music, and every now and then somebody tries to dance for the grown-ups. It's a wonderful evening. We have other activities. We try to bring people here and make them feel comfortable. That's what you need to do in any parish, and of course, this is a parish, and we're trying to do that too. Before I forget, though, I want to mention, since we did mention school.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
You're talking about young kids?
We've known each other so long, we think alike. Both Catholic High School and St. Joseph's Academy
That's right.
were founded here in St.
Education
Joseph
in Baton Rouge
Parish.
started in this parish.
Catholic High was right across North Street, and St. Joseph's Academy was right down.
Catty corner.
Sort of catty corner down what's now 4th Street. It was called Church Street back then. But we like to think of ourselves as the mother parish of the diocese, but also of its school system as well. And the rich heritage that the Brothers of the Sacred Heart and the Sisters of St. Joseph have left in our community is incalculable.
And here they had chapels.
Oh, well, sure, because the brothers lived here and the sisters lived here. Here in the cathedral, the brothers' chapel was the was the 4th Street side. Mm-hmm. You can tell by the 3 educator saints in the stained glass window: Saint Jean-Baptiste de la Salle, Saint Thomas Aquinas, and Saint Ignatius Loyola, the men saints. Over in the sisters' chapel, a little bit bigger chapel, because back then there were more sisters, we have the female saints: St. Catherine, St. Rita, St. Teresa, St. Rose, and a few of the others. It's just one way you can tell which was the brother's side, which was the sister's side. This was an important place. When the Sisters of St. Joseph this past year celebrated their 150th anniversary with a gala mass, where was it? Well, it was here, of course. This is where they came to Baton Rouge, and this is where they'll always be a special part of our parish family.
We were just talking about education, the sisters and the Sacred Heart Brothers, but also within this parish was a hospital.
That's right.
With
Our Lady
their
of the
order.
Lake Hospital, operated by the Franciscan missionaries of Our Lady.
For many years.
For many, many years. 2 of my sisters were born there. Right north of where the state capitol building is, that was the old Our Lady of the Lake Hospital site. And so that was an order of sisters. I didn't want to forget them.
Right.
That very intrinsically important to our cathedral parish. We've honored them many a time over the years and respect them very, very greatly. Yes, just like the schools moved to a more appropriate part of town, so did the hospital.
Right.
But they haven't moved out of our memory or our hearts.
That's awesome. One of the things we haven't touched upon that is part of this parish is the cemetery. St. Joseph Cemetery is here in town, and the precursor to that was Highland Road Cemetery. Do I have that right?
Actually, we still own 2 cemeteries.
Okay.
Historic Highland Cemetery is ours, even though it's now wholly within
Right.
St. Aloysius Parish. St. Joseph Catholic Cemetery is ours. It's right down Main Street on the other side of the railroad tracks, even though that's in Sacred Heart Parish.
Now.
And we have, what many people forget, is the perhaps smallest cemetery in the diocese. Right out here to the east of the cathedral building itself is a small cemetery that's pretty exclusive. In it are buried the bishops of Baton Rouge, who have died, of course. Bishop Tracy, Bishop Sullivan, and Bishop Ott are all interred here, right here on the cathedral grounds. And anyone who does visit the cathedral really should not just come inside and look around and admire, but should say at least a prayer for the repose of their souls as well.
Right.
It's a small cemetery. We only have 8 plots, and so what will happen when we get to the 9th and 10th bishops of Baton Rouge, I don't know, but hopefully we'll be looking down from heaven, wondering and finding out the answer of what they decide to do then.
That is.
We'd actually have a little more space, and they could expand it if they wish.
That's it.
But that's our cemetery. I know you're going to do a whole show
Right.
on
That's
St.
what's-
Joseph Catholic Cemetery, and that is, there's enough there in and of itself to take up a
Right.
whole half hour, I promise.
Well, I figured there was enough to talk about today in talking with you both as a cathedral parish and as a historic parish. And there's a lot of history with that cemetery. So that's just a whole nother show, folks, that you will have to watch.
Right.
So,
In the meantime, I certainly want to extend an invitation to anyone watching to come to the cathedral whenever you'd like. No, we're not trying to steal you away from your parish, but we're your cathedral, whether you want us to be or not, and you're very much welcome here whenever you'd like to come. If there's anything we can do for you, of course, let us know. But I do want to thank Renee and Catholic Life Television and the Department of the Archives for giving us a chance to share a little bit of our story and some of the information about our parish. It's always wonderful to be able to do so. If you have a church group, a group of children wants to come take a tour, happy to have you.
well, thank you, because we also are showcasing our diocesan priest. So
Okay.
this gives everybody a chance to get to know you and what you do for the diocese as well.
I'm one of
So
them.
now that we've thanked each other, we're just about out of time. So folks, join us for another episode of Roots and Faith.